So today's topic is inviting support. Inviting support. And what I love about these heart talks is I like to take topics and try to come from a different angle with them. And inviting support's an interesting one. I think all of us at some point in our lives have had support or wanted support or felt like we really needed the support, but we weren't willing to ask. We weren't willing to show that that was something that we needed. Or probably more of the time, we didn't even realize that we could. Can anybody relate to that? Moments in your life where you were going through challenge or strife and suffering, and there was probably people around you, but you just felt like, no, I can't ask them. I need to be responsible. I need to do this for them. I'm a leader in this. I'm a that. And you made some excuse, some story that kept you from actually just asking for what you needed. Can I share a little personal story? So most of my life I've kind of been, I wouldn't say a leader, but I don't ask for support. It's been very rare that I'll ask for help. Been very independent. That's the word I was looking for. Very independent. And there was points in my life where I really could have used that support. And especially with family, I think that's one of the hardest places that we are able to open ourselves up to support. Maybe because we have past conditioning or certain interactions or relationships with our family members. And especially as the son in my family, for some reason there was a sense of not really being able to say, hey, I need some help now. And there was a point where I was working through a lot of PTSD from the military. I used to be in the Special Ops Army for 6 years, actually. And I never really knew that there was all this stuff that had built up inside that was stuck. And it was several years later, visiting my family. I'd already moved here to Bali. I've been here for about 14 years. And a lot of stuff started to come up, a lot of emotions. And rather than immediately asking for help or even realizing that I could, what came up instead was anger and rage and offense and insult. And instead of asking for help, I pushed it away. How many of you guys have done that? Pushed away the help that was trying to be given, or especially the people that could have given it. And I was definitely doing that. And at some point I found myself at such a deep state of both depression and anger and all this emotion. And I was staying at my mom and my sister's at the time. They had gone to bed and I was kind of staying up and I was just deep, kind of percolating in all these emotions. And I finally said, that's it, I'm just going to leave. And I started to write a note, and as I was writing that note on the screen of my laptop, and I was going to just send it to them and leave, not say a word. And I started to write, I can't do this anymore. Those were the words. And when I originally wrote them, the meaning was simply, this is too much emotion, too many things, too much conflict, I need a break. But when I wrote them, there was a little bit deeper meaning inside of me, and it was this sense of giving up completely. And I know a lot of us, even in this room, have had those moments where life seemed like it was too much, like there was no escape, there was no way to change the circumstance that we were in or the emotions that we were feeling. And instead of looking towards possibility, we kind of just give up and we say, I can't anymore. And I'd written those words and it landed for me, and there was this sense of like, oh. And I remember falling to the floor and just weeping, starting to cry and just letting it all go. And I literally crawled to my mother's room, knocked on the door. She opened it, sees me, this ball of mess on the floor. And I just said, I need help. I need support. Probably the first time I ever asked that of my family. And I remember thinking also in that moment, why does it have to get so far before we're willing to ask for that support? Why do we have to hit rock bottom? You hear this all the time. People have their major turnarounds, their epiphanies, their transformations when they've gotten to the worst of their life. Why do we have to get there first? It just seems silly and unnecessary to me. And that's partly why I wanted to share this topic today of inviting support, because I think if we can just be told, because maybe we don't realize it, be told that we have permission to ask for help. We have permission to ask for the support that we want. We also have permission to ask for what we want, not just the support for it. Because maybe that's part of the block. If you think you need support, there's a part of you that's thinking, oh, but then people will know that I'm not perfect. How many of you suffer from perfectionism? Yeah, a few of you. How many of you are like, I don't know if it's perfect for me to raise my hand. I don't want to. And when we're stuck in that, then it limits us from actually opening up. Because those blind spots, those pieces of ourselves that it's not that they're imperfect, they're simply not seen. I was talking to a woman the other day here at the barn, and she was telling me that she was having this big issue with perfectionism and self-love. And I said to her, I think perfectionism or perfect is simply the balance of this moment. How is this moment balanced with your action, with your choice, with your expression, with your presence? How are you balancing it? It might be that you give a smile. It might be that you give a tear. And whatever the balance gets to be, that is perfection. But a lot of times we're not aware of the 360 view of all the different elements of a moment to understand mentally what that balance is. Which is why when I say invite, support, I'm saying an invitation to your emotions. Not even to your voice and the words of asking for help, but rather an invitation to drop in and feel where you're at and let it be seen. Let it be witnessed. Let me backtrack a little bit here, though. Let's set a little bit of foundation as to how we start to even feel our own sensations, our own emotions. Because I think in modern day society, we have become numb or saturated, both ends of the spectrum, with emotions and feelings, so much so that we need ever-increasing doses of intensity to try to feel something. But just like if maybe you've done a fast or a detox and then you go back to eating some food and maybe you were off sugar for like a week or something, and all of a sudden the tiniest bit of sugar, you're like, whoo, that's so intense. Because when we actually clear out and allow the emotions to shed, detox, fast out of us, cleanse, then our sensitivity comes back and it doesn't require this 2x4 hitting you over the forehead for you to see, oh, I'm feeling something. But rather it can be the subtleties. So the invitation is to pause, slow down, notice and witness. Now to do that we have to be present in this moment, this instance. And I like to call that act of coming into presence, acceptance. I know a lot of us have heard the word before, especially in spiritual communities and conscious talk. We hear acceptance all the time. But I don't think we've really defined it. We've looked to see what it means for each of us individually. So I'd like to present my definition of acceptance. A lot of people, I think, confuse acceptance with tolerance. You go to a friend and you're having a rough time, and you tell them all about it, and they're a very spiritual being, and they're like, oh, that sounds rough, but you just have to accept it. And you're like, I don't like you anymore. Because you don't have to just accept it. That's you're tolerating a situation, a condition, a circumstance, with the hope deep inside that it might pass and that you can endure long enough to get through it. That's not acceptance. My definition of acceptance is to recognize the reality of this moment as it is. To recognize the reality of this moment as it is. No identification, no attachment to it, no taking it personal. Just see it as if you were watching from a security camera and it was just a scene and you're just seeing what it is without the reactivity that normally would come up. Often when I'm seeing clients, I have a healing center down the street. And when I do one-on-ones, I always share with them different aspects of what I want them to do. And one of them is to observe, to witness what's going on in their system, in their sensations and things. And again, not to create attachment or identity. And the example I give them, it's as if you get a little sensation in the knee, and here's attachment and identity. You get a sensation in the knee and you go, something's going on in my knee. There's something wrong in my knee. I'm going to have surgery. I'm never going to walk again. Oh my God, I'm going to die alone. This is what happens when we attach and we personalize something. We get into a story. And the thing with the mind and stories is that it immediately attaches everything to survival. And so it literally bridges the gap. Even if none of the stuff is really possible, it starts sequencing it. It's like, something has changed. Out of the normal. This could mean death. How could it mean death? And it starts to piece it together. And so this is what happens when we attach or personalize. What would happen if in acceptance you just looked at the moment? You just looked at what it is for what it is. Notice that it's not about you, but it might involve you. You guys see the difference? That it's not about you, but it might involve you. I love telling this to couples. Christina and I actually do a lot of relationship coaching with people. And when they come to us and, there's always two sides to a story. And we're like, yeah, but they did this because they did it just to get me, just to do it against me and to make me mad. Probably not. Very rarely have I ever seen that anybody wakes up in the morning and is like, today I think I'm just gonna mess with Sarah. I'm gonna make her day bad. Nobody does that. They wake up and they think, how am I gonna survive today? Maybe not consciously, but unconsciously, that's what the mind is doing all the time. How am I gonna survive today? And then that dictates the choices and the behaviors we do if we haven't consciously become aware of what we want instead of what we're reacting to. So that's the next piece. If first we start with acceptance, finding ourselves present in this moment, recognizing the reality for what it is, the next step is to realize it doesn't have to stay that way. There are many more possibilities, a spectrum of infinite opportunities that you can move towards. This I call permission. To have the permission to move forward in your life instead of reflecting backwards all the time. Most of the time, from what I've seen and also in my own personal experience, every time that we're in a state where we need help, where we want support, and we're unwilling to ask for it, it's normally because we're reflecting on something from our past that we're trying to heal, clear, understand, explain, justify, validate, and we hesitate to bring anybody else in because there's a little part of our mind that's like, yeah, well, I got myself into it. I got to do it alone. Whereas if we can shift that and start to go from looking backwards towards looking towards what we want, there I see a difference. People, you look at this in the most successful and wealthy people, they always do it with support. That's their game plan, right? They're like, I'm going to get investments, somebody else's money. I'm going to have somebody else help me with doing this, somebody else's time and effort. They're always seeking support. They never try to do it by themselves. Because they're moving towards a goal in mind in the future, something they want to create and cultivate. So when I talk about permission coming from that place of acceptance and presence, permission is to go, there's something greater in my life that I can move towards. And I don't have to do it alone. That's the key piece. I don't have to do it alone. I see people trying to be independent out of a sense of needing to be strong instead of a sense of confidence. How do you know that there is something greater that you can move towards? I'm going to rephrase this a little bit. It's not that there's something you have to move towards that's greater, but there's always something you can grow towards, right? And a rule of life, of nature, is that if you're not growing, you're doing the opposite, which is dying. You're moving towards your death, right? A flower that's not growing and blossoming, or a plant that's not growing and blossoming, is wilting. It's deteriorating. And that doesn't mean that you're literally going to your deathbed, but it means most likely if you're just doing the same thing day in and day out. How many of you are here in Bali because you were burnt out with a job? Yeah, I knew it, right? Because you were doing the same thing every single day. And eventually there was no growth. And because there was no growth, every single day you were losing a piece of yourself, a piece of life. So when I say there's something better, what I'm saying is there's always something to expand into. There's always something that you can grow into with your learning, with your experience, with your expressing. And in those places, if we can shift our mentality to think, I can ask for support, I can invite support to live an even better life. Rather than thinking and being afraid to ask for support where you're finding imperfection or thinking and having self-judgment. Now in that case, of course, please also find support if you're willing to receive it. But it's much easier if you can shift the mentality from something's wrong with me to I want something more in my life, or I want to become more. That's actually probably the better word, is more, not better. These are all tricky concepts because they're on an edge, a fine sword's blade, because there's one part of me that's saying, yes, you can move towards more, and it's wonderful to grow into that. And then there's the other piece that's a little cautious going, it doesn't mean you always have to go towards more. You also want to be content where you're at. This is a rule of thumb I follow. I don't change anything in my life until everything is going great. Think about that. I don't change anything in my life until everything is going great. Now, it's not a self-sabotage thing. It's literally, if things are not great, if things are a struggle or a challenge, and I decide, I need to change something, I'm not changing it because I want to grow. I'm changing it because I'm avoiding the discomfort of that moment. You guys get that? And I see this all the time with people, especially those that do come and ask for support. They're always trying to get away from something instead of go toward something. This is a big observation if you just start to look around or even think about your own way of being. Even when I ask this very simple question, I'm going to ask you guys a question. There's a tendency, subtly, to go towards what you're avoiding instead of what you want. And the question is just that. What do you want? What do you want to feel? What do you want in life? What do you want for today? A lot of times when I ask that question, the first response that people will have is, well, I don't want to struggle anymore. And I don't want to be sick, or I don't want heartbreak, or I don't want this to happen, and I don't want that to happen. These are avoidances. These are the things you don't want. What do you want? It's a subtle question, but one that I think it rewires the brain a little bit when you really ponder on it. What do you want? Normally the second response I get after people list off all the things that they don't want is they'll say, well, I don't know. I don't know what I want. I call BS on that, belief system. Most people know what they want. They just don't realize that they have permission to have it. Otherwise, why do we get disappointed when we don't get it? You ever do that? You're like, well, I don't know if I want that. And then you see somebody else having it, you're like, damn it. Because I think we always do know deep down inside what we want. And I'm going to give you guys a little secret here. A little ninja strategy. Whatcha? Yes. By the way, if you guys come to my talks and you hear me ever say ninja strategy, you can do a wacha with us. And so I'm going to try it again. Ninja strategy. Wacha. Yes. We can do a little bit better. One more time. Ninja strategy. Wacha. Yes. If you see me outside and walking around, just come up to me and be like, ninja. Wacha. And walk off. What was I talking about before that? I always lose it. The idea of how do we actually come back to what we really want? How do we give ourselves that permission? How do we realize what it is? So simple. Every time, the thing that you want, it's going to be a feeling. Every single time. It's not the infinite possibilities of experiences and, exposures and different things that you can have. It's the feeling that you're seeking. That's what you want every time. You might say, no, I want $1 million. Why? I want to feel happy and free. Oh. I want to feel vital and abundant. Why? Well, I don't want to feel this way and this way. And so there's always a feeling behind the object or the goal, the achievement that we're looking at. When we realize that, then we can start to give ourselves permission to feel the feeling without having to go through all this other stuff. Now, this is where things, I think, get really tricky, because giving ourselves permission to feel. Giving ourselves permission to feel. When I even say that, obviously, I don't think any of you are like, ooh, a little scary, I don't want to feel happy. I think happiness, you're like, oh yeah, give that to me. But happiness isn't the only thing on the spectrum of feelings, is it? There's other emotions in there. There's sadness, there's grief, there's despair. We talked about that last week in the Heart Talk. There's anger. There's all sorts of things in the spectrum of our emotions, and I think we're afraid to feel certain things, and so we block it off. But here's the problem, and I think of this in the heart. Your heart only has a few openings that go into it, a few chambers. If you close off any one of them, you close them all off because things can't flow through anymore. So if you close off feelings of anger, or you close off feelings of sadness, well, now happiness can't move through you either. Joy can't move through you. So we have to risk the feelings we may not want for the feelings that we do. And realize that emotions are like a wave in the ocean, I like to say, that literally they're just passing through. They don't get stuck until we get focused on them, hold them down in our independent solitude of wanting to deal with it on our own. How often has it been that you were struggling with something, and maybe it was a deep emotion, and you were struggling with it for days, weeks, months, maybe even years, and finally you got yourself to the point that you talked to somebody about it. And in the moment of expressing it, sharing it, having not just yourself having to try to deal with it, but one other person giving perspective, everything can shift. And so that's what I mean by we silo ourselves into this idea that we have to deal with our emotions, the good and the bad, by ourselves. And especially the bad ones. Because I think when you're happy, you don't really hide that, right? When you're happy, you walk through the yoga barn and cafes here, or you're on your motorbike, and you're just like smiling and enjoying life and sharing it. But when you're sad or you're mad, where are you? In your bedroom, closed door, you got your music on, and you're just there by yourself. I often see this actually, especially here in Bali, and I like that in Bali, it's not stopped as much, which is great. How many of you had an emotion come up, especially sadness or something like this, and it was in an inconvenient time? You were in the middle of a class or at church or sitting at a cafe, and something just triggered you, and you're like, no. And you push it down, you suppress it, you depress it. By the way, that's how you lead to depression, is by depressing your emotions. You push it down and you're like, I'll deal with this later, when it's more convenient. And by convenient, you mean when you're alone in your bedroom with the soft music on, and you can just sit there and you're like, okay, now. But for any of you who've had this experience, what happened when you went to your room and you sat down, you set everything up, put a little candle, and you're like, okay, now it can come up. And nothing. Nothing comes up. Because like I said, emotion is a wave. It gets triggered almost like if something had been dropped into the body of water and then pushes this wave. That's the trigger in your environment that causes emotion. And then it's this wave that's going. Now either you fight the wave or you let it move through, because you can't hold on to it. You can't pause it and say, wait, we're going to deal with this wave later. You have to let it move through. And when you realize that's all it's doing, moving through, you might just give it that permission. I think the fear is that we get into these mindsets of permanency. We start to feel something we don't want to feel, and we get afraid, like, oh my God, I'm going to feel this for the rest of my life. Right? We haven't really moved on in certain maturity emotionally from our childhood. In childhood, everything was like massive universal impact, right? Well, we can't go for pizza tonight. My life is over, right? We expand things out into these huge things, and we think we've gotten rid of that, but the inner child within us is still doing it. A little emotion comes up. Maybe it's that there was a person that you liked in a room or a class that you were taking, and you thought you were starting to build some rapport. You haven't even talked to them, but you were making those little eye contacts every so often. And then one day they just made a weird face. And your whole world starts to collapse. And you start thinking, oh my God, they don't like me. And nobody likes me. And again, I'm going to die alone. Inner child just taking it away. A lot of you are smiling right now because you're like, I did that in the last class. We get to start to realize that everything is an impermanent expression of emotion moving through us like this wave. And when we start to realize that, it's so beautiful, because all we have to do is, if we maybe accidentally put a block, a wall, in the way of that wave, the invitation for support is to simply ask somebody to come and give us the safety to bring the wall down. I'm going to say that again, because this is a really key point. Invitation for support doesn't mean you have to go and be like, hey, I can't do this by myself. Will you help me, please? That might be harder to do. But the invitation is simply to realize that what you really need in order to let emotion rise, to feel that it's safe to express, is to know that there's a container that's being held for you in some way. And that could be the container of a journal that you're writing in. That could be the container of a dear friend. That could be a container of a professional. That could be the container of a class. Whatever it is, but knowing that there's safety. And when you know that there's that safety, then suddenly the walls start to come down and the waves just go as they wanted to. We get to let emotion move through us. And again, for me, I think the key philosophy of doing that is to create safety. And that's the invitation. Is to create safety for yourself. I'll give you an example that's really practical. How many of you have had those dreaded words, maybe from a partner or a family member or a coworker, and they say, hey, can you come by later? I need to talk to you. Right? We make jokes about this all the time, right? You hear that and your whole heart's like, ah! There's a moment of contraction and you think your life is over. You have no idea what it's going to be about. The idea of actually taking time to speak about something. So clarity with our requests is part of what we create safety with. Hey, later, can we talk about this thing and together find a solution? Together, could you help me process this? This changes the whole dynamic when we are clear about our intentions in life, which might mean you got to get clear yourself. What are your intentions? We go back to what do you want? And it gets really simple when you start to just define the wants as feelings. Because if you realize that, let's say for instance, happiness. Is there anybody in the room right now that does not want to be happy? Good. So that means that every single one of you knows that happiness is a desire, something that you would like. Now you have a trajectory. In every single moment of your life, you can say, I would like to create safety and the space for happiness. And so instead of letting your reactivity of emotions and holding of the emotion take that away from you, you can allow yourself to move towards what you want. Here's the trick. The emotion won't stay. Nothing is permanent. Everything is passing through. But just like a flame on a candle, if you watch it, it looks like it's flickering and it looks like it's constant, like it's the same flame. It's not. It's a new flame in every single instance. It's coming, going, coming, going, coming, going, coming, going, right? Same with every moment of life. It just looks like it's a consistency. It looks like we are living this sequence, when actually the person that's sitting here right now is a different one than the moment before. I love the Zen koan where a Zen master talks to a student and he says, put your foot in the river. And the student's like, okay, cold. And then he says, put your foot in the same river. And he does. And he's like, no, the river you put it in before is downstream. It's the same in life. Moments are passing, so who you are, what you are, where you are, everything is changing in every moment. But what you choose and decide to focus on, decide to invite into your life, decide to create space for, is what you consistently recreate into the form of that life, into the expression that you get to experience. And we go back to this idea of inviting support. And if we think of support because you're going through a challenge, if you're focused on the challenge, then you're inviting the challenge, not support. If you begin to focus on a solution, a dynamic, a desire, something you want as different than the challenge, not as an escape, but simply something you want to develop towards, then you can really get support moving towards it. How are you guys doing, by the way? Any other questions? All right. I'm going to speak a little bit to something I've noticed in our social conditioning. And this is more for the gentleman in the room, which I think is just yourself and myself. A lot of times in the social conditioning of gender roles and different things like this, and I know a lot of that's changing these days, there's that conditioning of, and it's the masculine nature, right? It's not even about gender, but the masculine nature has been defined as needing to be strong, needing to show no emotion. But I think that's been a distortion because we've distorted our belief of what strength is. It goes back again to tolerance and endurance. I think we've started to think that strength means that you can just endure, that you don't feel anything. Can I share what you realized early on in our relationship? Or do you want to share? When Christina and I first started to date, there was a moment where a lot of stuff was going on and something triggered me and I started to just cry. There was something really hit me deeply. And she'd never seen something like that. She grew up with 2 brothers in Germany. I don't think there's that much expression that's happening. And she was watching me and I could see that it was just like terror on her face. She's like, what's happening? He's leaking. What's going on? And eventually she literally said to me, she goes, I didn't know men had feelings. I didn't know men had feelings. And it is funny, right? But it's actually a little scary because I think there's a lot of us, even in this room right now, that haven't really considered that, not just for men, but for the part of somebody that you aren't recognizing that there's an emotion maybe hidden, that there's feelings there. The off-the-cuff comments that we might make, or the actions that we might take, or the inconsiderations, all these different things, they affect us, but if we don't show it, which in today's society we've been taught not to show a lot, we start losing empathy in the realization that we're all beings of emotion and feeling. It's actually what runs most of the show. So what would happen if the invitation to support is also an invitation to express, to show what's really there, to not block it behind walls of suppression, but instead to allow it into expression, because when you do that, it does more than just move the emotion from your system. It gives permission to others. How often have you seen a beautiful scene, or maybe you watch somebody else become very vulnerable, and it brings you to the same vulnerability? This is the permission of emotion when we allow it. Now here's what I think can happen is we have a little process. It's acceptance and then permission, and then that will eventually lead to expression. But in the permission piece, what we have to do is create that safety, and in that safety, the walls, our barriers of protection start to come down. The ones that are no longer needed. And I can tell you it's probably 90% of them. And as they start to come down, a magical thing happens. Automatically, your true self gets witnessed. A lot of times people think that expression is something like what I'm doing up here, where I'm, expressing out to all of you, but this is an expression. This is me just sharing outwardly. Expression is to let you see inwardly, to show vulnerably and sensitively who I am and who you are. That's expression, is to be witnessed in your truth. And it's not always the easiest thing to be in your truth, because most of the time it's going to seem like it doesn't fit, that it's not belonging in the space. But what I found is that in that space, there's always several people just waiting for the permission, an example, a model, some pioneer to go forward and say, I feel. And they're like, me too, me too, me too. Christina, can I share this story? You know which one I'm going to talk about, the Women's Festival? A few years back, Christina went to a women's festival. And admittedly, she didn't really want to go. She wasn't interested in going, but I pushed her to go because I had a feeling there was something that she was going to learn there. And she did indirectly, but the rest of it, she really was quite upset with me that I made her go. But she went, open mind, and it was here in Bali, and so you get some extremes of different kind of workshops and things. And she's looking at the schedule of things, and I think maybe you'd gone to a yoga class first and some other things. And then there was this thing on there saying, Yoni Puja. Yoni Puja. Now, for those of you who don't know these terms, I'll define a little bit. The yoni is a women's sacred area. Puja means it's a ceremony of honoring. So Christina thought to herself, okay, yeah, that'd be nice. Like, it's an all-women's festival. We'll probably sit there and, say some affirmations and honor our sacred womb and vagina and all these different things, and really just be in that femininity. Oh, beautiful. So she goes and she sits down, and the circle begins to gather, and as it's gathering, the instructor comes. And the instructor walks in, wearing just a robe, walks in, drops the robe, completely naked. Tell me if I'm saying it correctly. Sits up on a table, has her assistant come, and begins to demonstrate what the workshop's going to be. It's not a ceremony of honoring. It is have you guys done eye gazing? Right. Sometimes eye gazing is very powerful and also sometimes very uncomfortable. Now imagine yoni gazing. Because that's what they were going to do. They haven't met each other. They haven't created the safety of the container. It's just like right into it. And Christina was sitting there with emotions, feelings of conflict, going, this is not what I signed up for. This isn't why I came. This is why I told Rodolfo I didn't want to come to this festival. And there was the conflicting emotions that said, but I don't want to be a prude. I don't want to be closed-minded. Maybe I should open up to this. Maybe it's all okay. Nobody else is making a fuss. So she waited a few more minutes as the demonstration and some more instructions were being given. And then finally, thankfully, she honored her truth and she said, no, I can't. And she got up, quietly left. How many people got up right after you? 8 or 10 other women. Immediately after, because somebody had the bravery, the courage to show their truth. A lot of times we think about this, we're told, especially again in these conscious communities, like, you gotta be in your truth, you gotta let people know what their truth is, don't let them cross that boundary of your truth. And we take it as if it's a spear to stab people with. It's not. It's a vulnerability of showing the discomfort and honoring what brings you towards what you want instead. That's your truth. Your truth is not what you are trying to put on somebody else. That's an opinion. Your truth is the vulnerability of what is sensitive within you. It's to allow yourself to be witnessed in that. And then to courageously act from it. And when you do that, it ignites this permission in other people. This also is an invitation of support. To show the emotion that's true for you, and that invites others to show their emotion as well. And all of a sudden, we're all supporting each other. And not feeling alone. I think that's one of the biggest things of, again, this topic of inviting support. The crux of it is to realize you're not alone. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the middle of a session, and the work I do at my healing center, it's both somatic work and energetic work and also conversation, where somebody will be right at that moment of emotional release, and they're dropping in, but they're still a little afraid, and all I have to say, it's these magic words. I go, you don't have to be alone anymore. It's a permission not to do it by yourself anymore. You don't have to be strong and do it independently. You can be filled with strength and ask for support. So you see the difference? One's about endurance, the other is around courage and confidence. Confidence, by the way, how many people in here struggle with confidence? Yeah. I'm going to give you another secret. Another ninja strategy. Whatcha? We're going to get better at that. Confidence, super simple. Just keep doing the same thing consistently. You will build confidence. See, we think confidence has to be created before we've achieved, before we achieve or even take a step towards something. Like, oh, I don't want to try that. I'm not really confident in it. Maybe it's singing or coming up and giving a speech like this. Like, oh, no, I could never. I'm not very confident. You can only become confident with practice. Confidence is the accumulation of consistency. Because in that consistency, you become confident of the result. You get it? You become confident of the result. And that's the same thing in this. The more we start to actually create a space of safety to express and to request what we need and want in life, the more confidently we can be that life and the people around us will support. But if you never take that step to courageously ask, express, then you never begin to build the confidence. You never begin to build the result that lets you know that it is possible, that you're not alone. And the more that we actually start to invite others into our space safely, the more we see other possibilities instead of just the singular ones that we get stuck in as we are trying to do it by ourselves. We've been talking today about inviting support. And in inviting support, we started to realize that, a lot of times we hide behind walls of protection because we thought that the world outside was a danger or a threat instead of an aid, an assistance, a lifting up of the things that we might want to move towards. And the reason is because we're looking backwards towards our past, towards the things that reflectively maybe didn't go to plan. And we start to think that that's how it's going to be because we create this permanency. And if we can let go of that and instead embrace possibility, we start to see that through expression, through opening up, through simply letting emotions be the waves that they are and allow them to come forward, then we not only allow ourselves to open up and grow, because in that growing we start to add life and experience, and we move away from that which was depleting our own energy, our life force, and we give permission. We give permission to those around us to do the same, to open up, to be vulnerable. But notice, vulnerability must be prepared with safety. I'm going to say that again. It's really key. Vulnerability must be prepared with safety, and safety prepared with permission. The permission to be in your truth, your emotion, and your expression. And when you find that trifecta, suddenly the support has already been given. Thank you, everybody. And I invite you guys all not only to obviously come back, share with everybody, keep the conversation going, but go out and express, emote, be you, share your truth. Thank you.